Now, you take the ABC's Stan Grant, and it's so often the ABC, right? Anyway, Grant has written another poisonous and hypocritical piece for the ABC, saying, sure, we should wait for the coach's side of the story, but immediately then says, well, look, the truth in this case will in time be revealed, but we already know the ugly truths of the AFL. Well, hello, Stan, what do we know exactly? Well, Grant says, one thing we know, these latest allegations against officials at Hawthorn are violent in their depravity, and racism kills. Who's to be held account for this violence? And I got to ask Stan, I thought we were waiting for both sides of the argument. So what violence are you talking about? I haven't actually heard an allegation of violence. There he is, Stan Grant, already talking of racism and even violence, despite that cant about waiting for both sides of the argument. Joining me is Sophie Elsworth, media writer for the Australian newspaper. Sophie, thanks for your time. What did you make of this piece by Stan Grant?
Well, I thought it was an interesting piece there because he did point out issues within this report. But I think at the end where he said basically the AFL needs to do better, we need to hold our horses here, Andrew, as you've pointed out. We've only heard one side of the story, and that notion, that legal principle that you're innocent until proven guilty now seems to be flipped on the head, and it seems to be in the media now, guilty until proven innocent. And I think in the case of these coaches, they weren't consulted about this report. I think Hawthorn's handled it atrociously that the report was leaked. And now their careers of these coaches is effectively ruined before we even know the other side of the story. It's very flawed, Andrew, and I think we're seeing this happen more and more again in the media. And mud sticks. Unfortunately, whatever the case here, these allegations, and they are only that at this point, will stick on these coaches, whether they're true or whether they're not true.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. I mean, and I think it's ironic, I don't think any sporting code has done more than the AFL to try to be, anti-racist and fought. I mean, it's really a caricature of itself. And yet it seems to be held to increasingly higher standards and damned the harder, the more it tries. I mean, it's already drummed Eddie Maguire out of Collingwood. He got forced out of Collingwood for over what I believe is wildly exaggerated accusations of racism against him. I mean, it's just preposterous. But anyway, Stan Grant, can you explain why he now appears to accuse the coaches of violence? Now, he says, racism, which has not been proved in this case, that is violence, and therefore other Aboriginal football players are also victim of violence. He says, violence is also committed against Nicky Winmar, against Michael Long, against Adam Goods. Well, I don't believe that at all. And Eddie Betts and so many other people of colour. Violence, Sophie? I mean, shouldn't an ABC journalist be more careful with their words? What violence?
Well, this is, I guess, his interpretation there, Andrew, and this is what the ABC do. They put out these analysis pieces, which are really dressed up as analysis, but their opinion. We don't know the situation here, and to say there's violence in this situation, well, is there? Because we haven't heard the other side of the story. This is happening too often in the media, and this is why the media gets a bad name. The journalists should be impartial and sitting on the fence until we hear both sides of the story, in my view. We don't have that yet, and they're jumping the gun, and I think that's incredibly dangerous, Andrew.
Well, I think he's over-egging it. If the allegations aren't serious enough on their own, why does he need to crank up the rhetoric meter and call it violence? Racism is violence. Just call it racism. Or don't people believe that racism actually is something now? I don't know. I just think, Stan, get off your damn high horse and just be fair. Sophie, you are intrigued by this tweet from the ABC's struggling Q&A show, which is hosted by Stan Grant, advertising 5 people on its next panel, including Alan Jones, our former colleague, much missed, plus 3 politicians, one of them from the Nationals, and a writer identifying as Aboriginal, of course. What interested you about this?
Well, what's interesting with this tweet, Andrew, is that Stan's hosting the program this Thursday night, and he will be leading the discussion on the Hawthorn racism allegations. Now, we know his views on it. He's put out that analysis piece. Does this beg the question, is it appropriate? I mean, he's obviously got very strong views on this. He'll have to remain objective. I'm not doubting that he will. But I think the point, he didn't actually point that out in his piece, that he's hosting this program. But thankfully, there are a couple of people on there on the Conservative side as well. So hopefully it's a more balanced panel. But I think it's perhaps something that should have been pointed out in his piece, that he will be hosting this show.
Well, there's not an honest broker in that sense. Will he be tilting the scales one way or the other? But that is the ABC. But at least he's tried to get some balance. Two Conservatives out of a panel, including him, of 6. That's for the ABC. There's extraordinary balance. Sophie Elsworth, thank you so much for your time.